Lesson 67. The datives of purpose and of reference. Review of the dative. Caesar, Book 1, Chapter 9 concluded. Hi everybody, welcome back to Lenny's Latin class. Today we're on page 198. As I have mentioned before, this lecture series only has 73 lessons, and we're on lesson 67, so we're on the home stretch here. And as part of that, we're going through some big review lessons here in which we review large concepts. In other words, things that we may have learned in a piecemeal fashion, we are now putting together into big groups and reviewing them as a group. And today is no different, because here we're doing a big review of the dative case. And not only are we reviewing the dative case, we're also learning a couple of new uses of the dative case. So let's jump in first to section 522 and take a look at our vocabulary for this lesson. We have the first conjugation verb mando, which means to entrust. In parentheses, they have here put in hand, which means that this word could be related to the fourth declension noun manus, which means hand. Also, we have an idiom here, along with se and fugai. It has the idea of flee. It's betake someone's self to flight. That's what fugai means. It's in the dative case, so I think se is accusative and fugai is flight in the sense of to flight. We've seen the word renuntio before. That's nuntio, which means to announce or report, and then with re, it means to report back in the sense of bringing back word from someplace. Next, we have the second conjugation verb studeo, studere, studui, which means to be eager, to be zealous for something, to desire. And as you can see, it takes the dative case because you're eager for something or you're feeling desire for something. This is where we get our English word student. Also in Latin, there's a noun of the second declension, studium, which means something like dedication or zeal, zealousness for something. Next, we have the verb delego. That's de plus lego, and it means to choose or select. So it's third conjugation, delego, deligere, delegi, delectum. Remember that in Latin, there are two lego verbs. There's lego from the third conjugation, and then lego from the first conjugation. The difference is that the one from the first conjugation has a long e, so it's lego with a long e, lego, legare, legavi, legatum. But then from the third conjugation, it's lego, legare, and that's the one we have here. Lego legere from the third conjugation means to choose or select. It can also mean to read, as in to read a book. Lego from the first conjugation, lego, legare, that one can mean to deputize someone or to dispatch or send someone off as an ambassador or to send someone on a mission. So in Caesar's Gallic Wars, when we see the word legatus, which can mean a high-ranking general or an ambassador, it's the fourth principal part of that first conjugation verb with the long e, lego, not lego legere from the third conjugation. And so, since the first conjugation word lego can mean to deputize or to dispatch as an ambassador, that's why legatus means ambassador or a high-ranking general, because in each case, you are getting someone to go in your place. You're delegating or entrusting or deputizing someone. Finally, we have satisfactio. As you can see, that's just the word satis, which means enough, and facio, which means to do or make. So satisfactio means to apologize or make amends in the sense of trying to right a wrong or make it up to someone if you've done something wrong. So let's dig in now a bit more to the dative material here in this lesson. And in order to do so, we need to take a look at sections 524 and 525. 524 gives us a rule. A noun in the dative may denote the purpose or result of an action. And so those uses of the dative case have names. We're going to have the dative of purpose and the dative of result. So those are two things to watch out for in this lesson. In 525, we find out yet another use of the dative case. That's called the dative of reference. It says a noun in the dative may denote the object to which something is of interest. So we've got three kinds of dative to learn about in this lesson: dative of purpose, dative of result, and dative of reference. So let's take a look at section 523, and we will see model sentences with examples of each of those things. So let's take a look at number one. Number one says, castris locum delegit. Delegit is a form of delego, which is one of our new verbs for this lesson. It's perfect tense, third person singular. So it means he, she, or it chose, or he, she, or it selected. And the direct object is locum, which means place. So he, she, or it selected a place. And then castris is dative. That's the second declension noun castra, which is neuter, and it's always plural. So here it's dative plural because it's just always plural. But we translate it as the singular word camp. Why is it dative? Because it's an example of dative of purpose. The idea here is that he chose a place for the purpose of being a camp. So it's showing the purpose of what the thing was chosen for. So we can say, he chose a place for the purpose of a camp. He chose a place for a camp. And sometimes in English, we'll even use the word as to express this kind of thing. You might hear someone say, he chose a place as a camp. You could even say, he chose a place in order to be a camp. The point here is that castris in the dative is expressing the purpose of the place. It was chosen for the purpose of being a camp. In number two, vobis praesidio relicti sunt. Our verb here is a perfect tense passive verb. That's the verb reliquo, which means to leave. Relicti sunt is perfect and passive, third person plural. So they were left is what relicti sunt says. And you can tell from the participle relicti that it's talking about people. If it were neuter plural, it would be relicta. But with relicti, it's masculine plural, and so we know it's talking about people. In the military context of this sentence, it's probably talking about soldiers. So they, referring to some soldiers probably, have been left or were left. Now we have vobis and praesidio. Vobis means to y'all. That's the dative form of vos, the pronoun. So does this sentence say, they were left to y'all? Is that how we should translate it? Well, let's keep going and find out. Finally, we have the word praesidio. That's the second declension noun praesidium, which means guard. The etymology is prae, which means before, and then the verb sedeo, which means to sit. So it has the idea of sitting in front of someplace in the sense of guarding it. It's dative because it's a dative of purpose. So it's expressing for the purpose of a guard, in the sense of a guard detail. That is a group of soldiers standing there guarding something. It's not just one guard, as in one soldier. It's a guard group or a guard detail, a protective detail, perhaps. I mentioned a moment ago that sometimes when you translate the dative of purpose, you can translate it into English using the word as. And that's what we see here. The translation says, they have been left as a guard to you. Or you could also say, they have been left for a guard to you. So we know that wobis means to y'all. You're talking to more than one person. But how should we read wobis? Should we read it as the beneficiary of the act of leaving, that they have been left to y'all as a guard? Should we take wobis with relicti sunt, or take wobis with praesidio and say, they have been left as a guard to you, or they have been left as a guard for you? The answer is that we should read it with praesidio. And here's the reason why. Wobis here is what is called a dative of reference. And you can see in the paragraph below, it says, starting on line 4, wobis and sibi, sentences 2 and 3, denote the person to whom something is of interest. And these are called datives of reference. So if we wanted to be really wooden and pedantic, we could say, they have been left for the purpose of a guard with reference to y'all. That's what it's saying. Not a very good translation, but that is what it's expressing. Here's the difference if we read wobis with relicti sunt. If we say, they have been left to y'all as a guard, that's not quite the same as saying, they have been left as a guard for you. If we read it as, they have been left to y'all as a guard, it doesn't quite capture that the idea of guarding is for the benefit of y'all. It puts more emphasis on the fact that they have been left to y'all rather than the fact that they've been left for the purpose of doing some guarding and keeping y'all safe. But if we read wobis with praesidio, it says, they have been left as a guard for y'all. In other words, their purpose is to guard y'all and keep y'all safe. So wobis here is connected more with praesidio as a dative of reference, not so much with relicti sunt as a dative of indirect object. That's what I'm saying. Reading wobis as a dative of reference helps us understand that the idea of guarding is for the benefit of wobis, of y'all. And so in that way, it helps complete or clarify the meaning of what's being expressed by wobis and praesidio. By the way, this kind of construction has a special name. This is a dative of purpose working with a dative of reference. And so we have two datives working together. And so that is called a double dative. You don't see it too often, but it's nevertheless something good to be aware of. Again, that's called a double dative, a dative of purpose plus a dative of reference working together. Number 3 is next. Milites erant sibi impedimento. Milites means soldiers, erant means they were, and sibi is a reflexive pronoun in the dative to themselves. Remember that sibi is the same regardless of whether it's singular or plural. There's no separate form for singular and plural. Finally, impedimento, that's the second declension neuter noun, impedimentum, which means hindrance. And it's got a funny etymology. It's in, which means in, and then ped is the root word that means foot. So the idea is something on your feet, slowing you down. And so therefore, impediment. The letter N turns into an M almost universally before the letter P. And according to the authors of the book, impedimento here is a dative of result. So the idea here is that the soldiers were a hindrance to themselves. And again, impedimento is dative of result. Picture it like this, that the soldiers conducted themselves in such a way that they were a hindrance to themselves. Maybe they brought too much equipment and slowed themselves down. Maybe they dug their fortifications wrong and then had to redo it. Maybe they were too hasty and made mistakes, which caused them extra work. So looking at it like that, that's kind of what this sentence is saying. The soldiers were a hindrance to themselves. So impedimento is dative of result. Maybe you could think of it as it was the result of their mistakes or carelessness. And so, as a result, they were a hindrance to themselves. Something like that. Okay, so here in 523, we've seen examples of dative of purpose, dative of reference, and a dative of result. And again, when you have a dative of purpose and a dative of reference working together, that's called a double dative. Now we have a big review of the dative case in section 526. It's basically just a big list of all the different ways to use the dative case. In number 1, we have 3 different examples of how to use the dative case as an indirect object. Example 1a is using the dative as an indirect object with transitive verbs. And the example sentence is tuba puero dabitur. Tuba is a brass instrument, like a large trumpet or some kind of brass instrument that can wrap around your body. You may have seen pictures of it. For lack of a better term, we'll just translate it as trumpet. And puero is the second declension noun puer, which means boy. So it's dative singular. And dabitur is the verb do, which means give. So it's future tense, third person plural, passive. So dabitur says he, she, or it will be given. So along with tuba, it says the trumpet will be given. And then puero is the indirect object. So the trumpet will be given to the boy. So here we have a passive verb, and then puero is dative of indirect object. For me, example B and C are both similar. Let's take a look. It says certain intransitives. We're using the dative case with certain intransitive verbs. Ariovistus Germanis imperavit. I've mentioned a couple of times that we have 2 common verbs for commanding. One is eubeo, and one is impero. With eubeo, the person that you're commanding is in the accusative case, and you can have an accusative plus infinitive kind of construction. With impero, the person you're commanding is in the dative case, and that's what we see here. So ariovistus is the subject, imperavit is perfect tense, third person singular. So ariovistus commanded, and then Germanis is dative plural. So ariovistus commanded the Germans. And really, impero is a compound verb. It's in plus paro. I don't think scholars are fully sure of how it got to be a command, how it came to mean commanding someone. But it is apparently, nevertheless, a compound verb, which, to me, is why it takes the dative in the first place. So, in a nutshell, the verb impero takes the dative. Ariovistus commanded the Germans. And then under section C, it says certain compounds. That is, the dative of indirect object with certain compounds. Equitatui dumnorix praeerat. So dumnorix is the subject. Praeerat is the verb praesum, which means to be in charge of something. Literally, it's prae, which means in front of or before, and then sum, which means to be. So literally, it's to be in front of or to be before in the sense of being in charge. And equitatui is the fourth declension noun equitatus, which means cavalry. Here, equitatui is dative because praeerat takes the dative. So dumnorix was in charge of the cavalry. That's what this example sentence says. The reason why I say that B and C are the same to me is because compound verbs can be intransitive. And in B, impero is in fact a compound verb. So are these verbs taking the dative because they're intransitive or because they're compound verbs and the prepositional prefix is somehow suggesting or bringing up the dative? I don't know. I've read articles about it, and when I read those articles, I actually feel like when I'm finished reading the article that I know less than I did before I read it. It's a little confusing. Nevertheless, for our current purposes, the idea is that these verbs can take the dative, and they often do. Number 2 is next, and this is pretty common, the dative of possession. If you say something est mihi, you're saying it is to me in the sense of I have it or possess it. Tuba est mihi says a trumpet is to me. So in Latin syntax, if you say there is to me a trumpet or a trumpet is to me, that's the same thing as saying I have a trumpet, dative of possession. In number 3, we have dative of agent in the context of a passive periphrastic. Tibi signum dandum est. Signum is a second declension noun that means signal or sign. And then dandum est, well, dandum is a future passive participle of the verb do, which means give, and est means is. So signum, est, and dandum will say the signal is to be given. Dandum, again, is a future passive participle. It has 3 characteristics. It has the idea that the action will be in the future. It has the idea that the action will be experienced passively. And it has the idea that the activity must be done, needs to be done, ought to be done, should be done. It carries with it a feeling of necessity, that it must occur. The signal is to be given in the sense of it must be given, it should be given. And we do the same thing in English. If you walk into a dirty room with lots of things that need to be done and fixed or put together, you might say, there are many things to be done here, meaning that there are many things that must be done, need to be done, should be done. So we say largely the same thing in English. So signum dandum est, the signal is to be given in the sense that the signal must be given. And tibi here is a special use of the dative case. In the context of a passive periphrastic, it can show agent, the person who is supposed to be doing that action. So here tibi means by you. So the signal is to be given by you in the sense that the signal must be given by you. And to translate it into smooth English, we change things around a bit. We make the verb active and we make tibi into the subject. We say, you must give the signal. We change it around completely to make it sound like smooth English. In number 4, dative with certain adjectives. Puer est similis patri. Puer means boy, est means is, similis means similar to or like. And then patri is dative singular of the noun pater, which means father. So it says, the boy is similar to the father, meaning to his own father. So in our English translation, we would throw in the word his and say, the boy is similar to his father, or the boy is like his father. 5 and 6 are relatively new. We only learned them in this lesson. So number 5, dative of purpose. Castris locum delegit. He chose a place for the purpose of being a camp. So castris is dative plural, dative of purpose. We could say he chose a place for the camp. He chose a place as a camp. The idea is in your translation to indicate that the place was chosen in order to be a camp. Number 6 is next. Dative of reference. Vobis praesidio relicti sunt. they were left, that's relicti sunt, meaning soldiers, men, troops, they were left for the purpose of being a guard detail. Praesidio is dative of purpose. So they were left as a guard, or they were left for a guard. They were left for the purpose of being a guard, something like that. And then vobis is not dative of indirect object. It's not that they were left to y'all. It's that the to y'all part of it is the intended beneficiary of the act of the guarding. So we read vobis as being connected to praesidio, not being connected with relicti sunt. This is a double dative. We have dative of purpose and dative of reference working together. So relicti sunt, they were left as a guard for y'all. You could even perhaps get away with translating it as they were left to guard y'all. You could even strengthen it up a little bit like that, and I think that would be true to the Latin. That would probably not be too bad a way to put it. Let's move on now to section 527. That's our exercises for this lesson. Go ahead and turn off the recording and do all the exercises, and as you do, see if you can figure out what kind of dative is being used. This lesson is a big review of the dative case, and so I'm sure there will be lots of uses of the dative in these exercises. So as you go along, see if you can figure out what kind of dative it is. Of course, you can refer back to the list we saw in section 526. So that will make a good reference for you as you go through the exercises. So go ahead and turn the recording off, and when you're ready, turn the recording back on, and we'll go over them together. Okay, hopefully by now you've completed your homework here in section 527. Let's go over the exercises together, starting with number 1. Number 1 says, His Caesar ite respondit. Our subject here is Caesar. The verb is respondit. That's the verb from the second conjugation, respondeo, which means to answer or reply or respond. It's perfect tense. If it were present, it would be respondet with the letter E. But here with an I, respondit, it's perfect tense. So Caesar replied, Caesar responded, Caesar answered. And then ita means thus. And then his is dative plural. We don't know what gender it is because it's the same for all three genders. His is masculine, feminine, and neuter. And that word represents the group of people being responded to. So the sentence reads, Caesar thus responded to these, in the sense of these people. It looks to me like his is a dative of indirect object, possibly because respondeo is intransitive, and possibly because it's a compound verb, because it's re plus spondeo. Number 2 is next. Reliqui sese fugae mandarunt. The subject here is reliqui. That means the remaining people, or the people that are left. It's really a perfect passive participle of the verb relinquo, which means to leave or abandon. So literally, relinqui is having been left. And so it's really a substantive adjective. It's the having been left people. And the verb is mandarunt. That's one of our new words for this lesson. Mando, mandare, mandavi, mandatum. To entrust. Here it's in this idiom that means to flee, to betake oneself to flight. Mandarunt is a syncopated form. It really would be mandaverunt. So this is a perfect tense syncopated form. Unsyncopated, it would be mandaverunt. But syncopated, we lose the V and the E, and we just get mandarunt. So mandarunt says they entrusted, and then sese is the direct object. They entrusted themselves, and then fugae is dative, to flight. It's an idiom, meaning that they fled. So basically, number 2 says, the remaining ones fled, or the rest fled. Literally, the rest entrusted themselves to flight, or betook themselves to flight. Number 3 is next. Venit belgis auxilio. Venit is a form of the verb venio, which means come. It's perfect tense here. If it were present, the E would be a short E. But with that long E there, it's perfect tense. So venit says he, she, or it came. Belgis is dative plural. It means to the Belgians. And then auxilio is the second declension noun auxilium, which means help or aid. This is a dative of purpose. And then belgis is a dative of reference. So what we have here is a double dative. We want to read belgis as being attached to auxilio. So not that he came to the Belgians as a help, but he came as a help specifically for the Belgians. That's the idea, is that the help is for the Belgians, not that he came to the Belgians. So belgis is not working with venit. It's not he came to the Belgians. And even if it were saying he came to the Belgians, it wouldn't use a dative. I think that kind of physical motion would require an accusative along with a preposition. So with venit meaning he came or she came or it came, belgis doesn't work meaning to the Belgians in that context. So really belgis has to go with auxilio. To be, correct Latin, it really needs to be a dative of reference. So he came for the purpose of being a help. Auxilio is dative of purpose. And then the help is for the Belgians, for the benefit of the Belgians. Dative of reference. So it's not saying he came to the Belgians as an aid. It's not saying that. It's saying he came as an aid to the Belgians. Number 4 is next. Nois rebus studebant. We don't have an explicitly stated subject. It's just studebant. They were eager. They were zealous. That's imperfect tense. And then nois rebus is dative of indirect object, working with an intransitive verb, studebant. Studebant can't really take a direct object. You can't be eager, a car. That doesn't make any sense. Or you can't be zealous, a car. Studebant is just telling you the status of someone, just that they're eager, they're zealous. And so nois rebus tells us what they're eager for. They were eager for new things. Nois rebus is an idiom meaning revolution. So it's new things in the sense of a new governmental setup, a new governmental situation. So number 4 says they were eager for revolution. Number 5 is next. Novissimis praesidio erant. Again, we have a double dative. It's dative of purpose, that's praesidio, and a dative of reference, that's novissimis. So erant says they were. We don't have an explicitly stated subject. Whoever the they is probably a group of soldiers because they're there as a guard. Praesidio is dative of purpose, so they were as a guard, or they were for the purpose of a guard. And who were they guarding? Novissimis. Novissimis is a superlative adjective. It's the adjective novus noa novum, which means new. But it can also mean last. And so in Roman military lingo, novissimum agmen means the last block of troops in a marching formation. We've talked many times about the difference between acies and agmen. Acies and agmen both are often translated as army, but acies is more of an army in battle formation, lined up in a battle line on the battlefield, getting ready to do battle. Augmen is more of a group of soldiers on the march, marching down the road, perhaps in some kind of block, perhaps in some kind of marching formation. We don't really know. But it's an army on the march, not an army set up on the battlefield for battle. That would be achies. The superlative of novus, noa, noam, novissimus, it can mean newest, but also it can mean last. Remember, if you're watching a parade go by, the last people in the parade at the very end, as you're standing there watching it go by, those people are, to you, the newest. They're new in the sense that they got there later than anybody else. So they're the newest in the sense of last. So novissimum augmen would mean the last block of troops, the last group of troops marching in a line of Roman soldiers marching along, traveling from one place to another. So novissimum augmen is that last group of troops. And so if someone comes up from behind to attack them, that's the people that would get attacked, is because they're at the end of the line of soldiers. They're in the back. So number 5 says, they were for the purpose of a guard for the last people in the formation. Novissimis is a substantive adjective. That's a dative of reference, and you have to supply the idea of that they're in the last part of the formation. In the footnote, they say, read it as novissimo augmeni. So then the sentence would say, they were as a guard for the final or last formation. Sometimes you'll see it referred to as the rear guard. So, it's a little bit clunky, but we could translate it as something like, they were a protection for the rear guard. Something like that would do just fine as a translation. But the big thing to notice here is that praesidio is dative of purpose, novissimis is dative of reference. Together they join forces and form a double dative. Number 6 is next. Duikiakos fuit amicissimus Caesari. The subject is Duikiakos. That's the aristocratic Haiduan person we've been reading about. Fuit is perfect tense. It means he was. And then amicissimus is a superlative adjective. It means the friendliest or the most friendly. And then Caesari in the dative tells us to whom he was most friendly. Amicissimus does not have to mean friendliest or most friendly. We can translate it merely as very friendly. So number 6 says, Duikiakos was very friendly to Caesar. Number 7 is next, and it's a question. Qui legioni Caesar praecipue indulsit? The subject is Caesar. The verb is indulgeo. That's indulgeo, indulgere, indulsi, indultum from the second conjugation. And here it means to favor, to be favorable toward, to be inclined to play favorites with someone. And in this kind of sentence, it's intransitive. So the subject is Caesar, the verb is perfect tense. He was favorable toward, or something like that. And then legioni is dative singular to the legion. Qui is a dative interrogative. So qui plus legioni will say, to what legion? And then praecipue means especially. So literally, it's something like, to what legion was Caesar especially favorable? Or to what legion was Caesar especially indulgent? But to make it into smoother English, we could make the verb transitive and say, what legion did Caesar especially favor? Number 8 is next. Helvetiis est in animo. This is really kind of a fragment, I guess, of a sentence, just to help us practice. We have the idiom here of being in animo, that is, being in mind. And the sense of it is when you have something in mind that you intend to do it. So est in animo says it is in mind, or really we could read est with helvetiis as a dative of possession. So it is to the helvetii, that's dative of possession in the sense of they have it, and then in animo means in mind. So literally, it is to the helvetii in mind, in the sense of the helvetii have it in mind, in the sense of the helvetii intend. Number 9 is next. Caesari renuntiatur helvetiis esse in animo per agrum sequanorum iter facere. We have several layers here. First of all, the main verb here is renuntiatur, and that means it is reported back or it is related back. And then Caesari is dative singular. So it is reported back to Caesar, or it is being reported back to Caesar. And when you report something, you're talking or giving a message. So this kicks off some indirect speech. And of course, in any indirect speech, we need a subject accusative and then an infinitive to be the verb. In number 8, we saw a dative of possession, helvetiis est. It is to the helvetii. Here we have that same thing, but with an infinitive because we're in indirect speech. So the first few words of this exercise read like this. It is being reported back to Caesar that, we've got to throw in the word that because we're going into an indirect statement. It is being reported back to Caesar that it is to the helvetii, in the sense of the helvetii have. And what do they have? They have in animo, they have something in mind. And what do they have in mind? Facere iter per agrum sequanorum, to make a journey through the territory of the sequani. Per means through, agrum means territory, sequanorum is genitive plural, it means of the sequani. Iter facere is the old idiom that means to make a march, to make a journey. So with helvetiis and esse as a dative of possession, it is to the helvetii. The thing they have in mind really is per agrum sequanorum iter facere. So that part of the sentence really is a noun clause. The whole idea of making a journey through the territory of the sequani, that sense unit really is the subject of esse. So to make the journey is to the helvetii in mind, in the sense of the helvetii have it in mind to make a journey through the territory of the sequani. So we have 3 levels going on here. We have the main sentence, which is Caesari renuntiatur. Then everything from helvetiis to facere is indirect speech. That could all be considered as one sense unit or one noun clause that is the subject of renuntiatur. Then within the indirect speech, everything from per agrum to facere, that could be a noun clause that is the subject of esse. That's the thing that they have. It's the thing that is to the helvetii. So let's translate the idea of the helvetii having it in mind. Let's translate that as they intend. So we'll do a non-literal translation here. And what we get is this. It is being reported back to Caesar that the helvetii intend to make a journey or to march through the land of the sequani or through the territory of the sequani. Number 10 is next. Liscus summo magistratui praeerat. Okay, liscus is someone's name. Praeerat is the verb praesum, which means to be in charge of something. Literally, prae means before or in front of, and then sum means to be. So literally, to be in front or to be before something in the sense of being in charge of it. So liscus and praeerat together say liscus was in charge, or liscus was at the head of something. Then we have the fourth declension noun, magistratus, here it's in the dative case. Priorat takes the dative, by the way. And so the fourth declension noun, magistratus, can mean either the magistrate himself, or it can mean the office of magistrate, that is, the magistracy. So it can be the person or the office, either one. Here it's referring to the office of the magistracy. By the way, this word is related to our English word master. In Latin, magister is a word that means a male school teacher or schoolmaster. Magistra would be a female school teacher or schoolmaster. It's related to the word magis, which means more. And in English, we have words like magisterial. If you write a book about plants and they say, you wrote a magisterial book about plants, it means it was a masterful work about plants. So the idea of this root word in Latin has to do with the idea of being master of something. So that's the etymology. And magistratui here, again, is dative, and it's got sumo along with it. That means highest. That's a superlative adjective. So woodenly, we could say Liscus was in charge of the highest magistracy. But that's not very good English, so they've suggested there in footnote 3 that we translate it as Liscus held the highest magistracy. Number 11 is next. Locus idoneus castris tibi delegendus est. The subject here is locus, that means place. Idoneus means suitable, it's modifying locus. So the subject of the sentence is a suitable place. And then we have a passive periphrastic, delegendus est. Est means is. Delegendus is a future passive participle of the verb delego. That's one of our new verbs for this lesson. Delego, deligere, delegi delectum, which means to choose or select. Delegendus, again, that's a future passive participle. It has the idea of action being done in the future, being done passively, and the idea that it needs to be done or must be done or ought to be done. And as a participle, it's masculine because it has to match the gender of locus. Locus is masculine grammatically, and so delegendus is masculine because locus is the subject of delegendus est, and the genders have to match. Delegendus is not masculine for reasons of natural gender, but just because of the grammatical gender of locus, because we're not talking about a person here, we're talking about an inanimate object. So locus plus delegendus est says a place is to be chosen, in the sense of a place must be chosen. Tibi is dative of agent. Ordinarily, with passive verbs, if you want to say that it needs to be done by a person, you would have an ablative of agent. You'd have a or ab plus an ablative. But in this particular construction, the passive periphrastic, you can have a dative of agent. And so tibi here is dative of agent. It's saying a suitable place is to be selected by you, in the sense of you must select a suitable place. And then castris is dative of purpose. It means for a camp. So literally, a suitable place for a camp is to be chosen by you, in the sense of you must choose a suitable place for the camp. Number 12 is next. Caesar dicit sibi nullam cum his amicitiam esse posse. Here we have Caesar saying something, and that takes us right into indirect speech. So Caesar dicit says, Caesar says, or Caesar is saying. Then we need to throw in the word that, and then we go into indirect speech. For indirect speech, we need a subject accusative, and then we need an infinitive to be the verb. Amicitiam is the subject accusative, and then posse is the infinitive verb within the indirect speech. So what it says is this: Caesar is saying that friendship is able. Okay, amakitia means friendship. And then posse is a present infinitive of the verb possum, which means to be able. So Caesar dicit amakitiam posse. Caesar says that friendship is able. And then we have a complementary infinitive working with posse, that's esse. So posse plus esse will say, is able to be. So Caesar says that friendship is able to be. Amakitiam has nullam modifying it, which means no. So nullam amakitiam would say no friendship. So that gives us this. Caesar says that no friendship is able to be. Then we have a reflexive pronoun sibi, which is dative. It's referring back to Caesar. And it's really forming a dative of possession. It's saying this: Caesar says that no friendship is able to be to him, in the sense of a dative of possession, in the sense of Caesar says that he cannot have friendship. We could say, perhaps, Caesar says that no friendship can be to him, in the sense that he can have no friendship. And then cum his means with these people. His is a form of hic haec hoc. It's ablative plural because it's the object of the preposition cum. It's just an ablative of accompaniment. So with these, in the sense of with these people, his is a demonstrative pronoun here. It's not paired up with any noun so that it's an adjective. It's just a pronoun. So literally, it says, Caesar says that no friendship can be to him with these people. Again, sibi is working as a dative of possession. So it's a little bit tricky to translate, but in smooth English, Caesar says that he can have no friendship with these people. We have to change it around a bit to get it into smooth English. 13 is next. Si vos haeduis de injuriis, quas ipsis sociisque eorum intulistis, satisfacietis, ego vobiscum pacem faciam. This exercise is a conditional, starting with si up through the word satisfacietis. That's the protasis or protasis of the conditional, the if part, and then the then part, known as the apodosis, that's ego vobiscum pacem faciam. So the subject of the protasis is vos, that's y'all, and the subject of the apodosis is ego, I. So the structure here is, if y'all do such and such, then I will do such and such. That's the overall structure of the whole thing. Within the protasis, the main verb is satisfacietis. That's future tense, second person plural. So it means y'all will, in the future, y'all will make amends or y'all will apologize. The protasis is saying, if y'all will apologize or if y'all will make amends, then something else will follow. Vos is the pronoun that is the subject of satisfacietis. We don't really need it there. The authors of the book are just putting it there for practice. So it means y'all, and it's nominative, and that's the subject of satisfacietis. And then haeduis is dative plural because they're the ones receiving the apology or receiving the making of amends. For the sake of simplicity, let's translate satisfacietis as apologize. By the way, that's one of our new vocabulary words for this lesson. You can see it in the vocabulary section, section 522. Si vos haeduis and satisfacietis. Those four words will say, if y'all will apologize to the haidui, then we have a prepositional phrase, de injuriis, which means concerning the injustices or about the injustices. Then we have a relative clause, quas ipsis sociisque eorum intulistis. That's a relative clause starting with the relative pronoun quas. Quas is plural and feminine because its antecedent injuriis is plural and feminine, but it's accusative because of the role it plays in the relative clause. It's the direct object of intulistis. Intulistis is the verb infero, which means to bring upon or inflict upon. It's a compound verb, so it's going to take the dative. Ipsis and sociis are both dative plural because they're working with intulistis. By the way, intulistis is second person plural, perfect tense. So you can tell that from the tuli there. Remember that pharaoh is pharaoh, fere, tuli, latum. So when you see tuli, that's perfect stem. Okay, so intulistis means y'all inflicted or y'all brought upon. So what we have so far would say, if y'all will apologize to the haidui about the injustices which y'all inflicted upon, and then ipsis means they themselves. That's the intensive pronoun known as ipse. So quas, ipsis, and intulistis will say, which y'all inflicted upon them themselves, referring to the haidui. And then sociisque, the que ending there supplies the word and sociis means allies, and that's also dative plural. That's the noun socius, which means ally. So the relative clause so far would read, which y'all inflicted upon them themselves and upon the allies. And eorum is a form of id. It means of them. It's genitive plural. So which y'all inflicted upon them themselves and upon their allies. We can translate eorum simply as their, their. Within the clause we're in, the subject is not the haidui, it's some other group of people. So instead of saying sociis suis, they say sociis eorum to signal that it's not the allies of the subject of the sentence, but the allies of somebody else, in this case the haidui. Okay, so what we have so far would say this: if y'all will apologize to the haidui for the injustices which y'all inflicted upon them themselves and upon their allies, as you can see from footnote 4, we can translate de here as for to make it sound like good English. You know, in English, we say that we apologize for something. So translating de here as for is just merely to make it into idiomatic English. So that's the protasis of the conditional. So if all that happens, then ego, I, faciam, that's a future tense of facio, I will make. Pacem means peace. That's the accusative singular form of pax, which means peace, from the third declension. And then vobiscum says with y'all. Vobis is y'all in the ablative case, ablative plural, and then cum means with. So instead of cum vobis, it becomes vobiscum, with y'all. By the way, faciam could be present tense subjunctive, but since satisfacietis is future tense, that makes me want to translate faciam also as future tense. And so the result is a future more vivid conditional. Future indicative in the protasis, future indicative in the apodosis, equals a future more vivid conditional. So number 13 as a whole reads like this. If y'all will apologize to the Haidui for the injustices which y'all brought upon them themselves and their allies, I will make peace with y'all. Let's move on now to section 529. That's our reading from Caesar's Gallic Wars. This is book 1, and it's the last part of chapter 9. As you can see, the title here of this reading that they've given here in this book is The Agreement Between the Sequani and the Helvetii. Spoiler alert, there's an agreement between the Sequani and the Helvetii. How do they do it? Well, apparently Diwakiakis comes in and goes and talks to the Sequani, and they work out some kind of arrangement. And in this particular reading, we figure out, well, according to Julius Caesar at least, why Diwakiakis did that. So let's jump in to line 1 here on page 200, section 529, and let's read, starting with line 1. Cupiditate regni adductus, novis rebus studebat. We do not have an explicitly stated subject here. We just have to realize that it's still talking about Diwakiakis. Notice that we're not talking about groups of people. We're talking about one person because, well, studebat is singular. Also on line 3, volebat, and then adductus is singular too. So all this stuff is singular. We're talking about one person, and that's Diwakiakis. If you'll recall in the last reading, according to Julius Caesar, the Helvetii decided to call in a favor from Diwakiakis, an aristocrat from the Haidui tribe. So why would Diwakiakis try to help the Helvetii? What would be his motivation? Well, here on line 1, it says adductus, which means having been influenced. That's a perfect passive participle of the verb adduco, the preposition ad plus duco, which means lead. So having been literally led to or influenced, cupiditate, that's ablative of means, and it means by the desire. So by desire, and then regni means of kingship. That's the second declension noun regnum, which means kingship, royal power. It's related to the verb rego, same root. The idea is ruling. And regni here is a classic case of an objective genitive because kingship is the target of the desiring. The cupiditate, by desire, it's desire for kingship. Literally, desire of kingship, but again, it's an objective genitive. The first 3 words will say this: influenced by desire for the kingship. And then we have studebat. That means he was zealous for, or he was eager for. That's the verb studeo. And then novis rebus is dative plural. That means new things. It's an idiom that means revolution. So novis rebus, along with studebat, will say he was eager for revolution. Notice that studebat is intransitive, and so this is why it's taking the dative. He's eager for the things expressed there in the dative case. Moving on. Et quam plurimas civitates suo beneficio habere obstrictas volebat. Volebat is an imperfect form of volo, which means to want. So volebat says he was wanting. And along with that, we have habere, the infinitive, which means to have. So he was wanting to have. The direct object of habere is civitates, which means states. That's accusative plural, the third declension noun civitas. So volebat, habere, and civitates will say he was wanting to have states. We have a superlative here, plurimas, and along with the word quam, it means as many as possible, or the greatest possible number. Plurimas is the superlative form of multus multa multum. Multus multa multum means much or many, and then plus means more, and then plurima is the most. Like all superlative adjectives, it's a first and second declension adjective. Plurimus, plurima, plurimum. And so plurimas is feminine accusative plural to match civitates, which is grammatically feminine. So quam plurimas civitates says the greatest possible number of states, or perhaps as many states as possible. Okay, so volebat habere, and then the rest of it, he was wanting to have as many states as possible. And then we have obstrictas, which means obligated. As you can see from the footnote, that's from the verb obstringo. So obstrictas is a form of the perfect passive participle. Having been bound, having been put under obligation, we could just say obligated. So he wanted to have as many states as possible obligated. Finally, we have suo beneficio, which is ablative singular. It's an ablative of means, as far as I can tell. And so the idea is having states obligated by his kindness. So suo beneficio means his kindness, but it's an ablative of means. So it's by his kindness, or perhaps because of his kindness. But regardless of how you slice it, it's the same idea that if he does a big favor for you, you're kind of under obligation to do a favor for him. And this is a very Roman mindset because this brings to mind the Roman client system in which you would have a patron and then clients who would work for that patron. Every morning, a wealthy patron would greet his clients or dependents at his house. They would come and he would perhaps give them some food or some money. And then because of their obligation to him, they would be on his team, so to speak. They would be his advocates and minions, perhaps. So this patron-client system, or what you might call the patronage system, would be very clear to an ancient Roman reading this. The idea that they're obligated because of what Duikiakis has done for them. It's very much a situation of you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. So I feel sure that an ancient Roman reading this would think of the Roman system of patronage, which is very much a part of Roman culture during this period. We could translate beneficio as kindness, favor, generosity, whatever you want. The idea is that it's a patronage situation. Moving on, itaque rem suscipit, et a sequanis impetrat, ut per fines suos Helvetios ire patiantur. Let's stop there. Suscipit is the verb suscipio, which means to undertake. Literally, it's sub, which means under, plus capio, which means to take. So literally, undertake. The B in sub turns into an S, and then the A in capio turns into an I. So sub capio turns into suscipio. So suscipit says he, she, or it undertakes. Itaque means something like and so. Ita means so. The que ending provides and, so it's something like and so. And then rem here is accusative. That's the direct object of suscipit. So these first three words will say, and so he undertakes the thing. Of course, we need to find a better, more specific word than merely thing. So we could say task, affair, job. Why don't we say task? We'll say, and so he undertakes the task. Then we have et, which means and, going into a new clause here. A sequanis impetrat. The verb impetro means to obtain the thing you're asking for, to get the thing you want or the thing you're asking for. So sometimes if you look it up in the dictionary, it'll say to obtain a request. So here impetrat says he obtains, and then asequanis says from the sequani. So what's going on here? Diwikiakis, a powerful aristocrat from the Haidui tribe, he goes and talks to the Sequani. That's a tribe that's on the west side of the Helvetii. They're on the other side of the Jura mountain chain. So he goes to them, and somehow he gets them to agree to allow the Helvetii to come through their territory. How does he do it? I don't know. It could be that they owed him a favor. It could be that he's playing the long game here. He's strategically trying to move the chess pieces around on the chessboard to position himself for greater power. According to Julius Caesar, on line 1, he was adductus cupiditate regni, influenced by desire of kingship. Maybe this is part of some plan he has to grab power. Who knows? But anyway, the Latin here says, asequanis impetrat. So he obtains, meaning Diwikiakis obtains, he obtains in the sense of he obtains the request from the sequani. Now we have ut, and then we have a new clause. Let's read it. Ut per fines suos Helvetios ire patiantur. This is a subordinate clause starting with ut. It's an ut clause. It has a subjunctive verb. And the verb here is patiantur. That's a form of the verb patior, which is a deponent verb. Patior, pati, passus sum. That's where we get our English word passion, because it means to suffer. For example, in the phrase, the passion of the Christ, the word passion there means the suffering of the Christ, from the Latin word patior. But it doesn't just mean suffer, it also means allow or permit. And we have that same kind of usage in English. For example, in the King James Bible, Jesus says, "Suffer the little children to come unto me." That means allow the little children to come unto me, or permit the children to come unto me. So in Latin, patior means suffer and permit, and in English, suffer means suffer and permit. So ut plus patiantur says this, that they allow. Patiantur is present tense, third person, plural subjunctive. Again, it's a deponent verb, so it looks passive, but it's not passive. You may ask, what kind of ut clause is this? Again, as I've mentioned before, in section 563 of Allen and Greenough, they list all the different kinds of ut clauses. And what this looks like to me is, that's 563D, verbs of determining, decreeing, resolving, bargaining. And that's exactly what we have here, is we have bargaining for something, and then they decree something, they resolve it. That's exactly what we have here. So ut up to patiantur is a subjunctive subordinate clause with verbs of determining, decreeing, resolving, or bargaining. Impetrat plus ut and patiantur will say, he obtains that they allow, or he obtains that they permit. Now we have an accusative plus infinitive construction, Helvetios ire. The Helvetii go. So along with patiantur, they permit the Helvetii to go per fines suos, through their territory. Here we have suos, which is suus suasum, because it's referring back to the subject of the verb in patiantur. Patiantur is referring to the sequani, and so suos fines, their own territory, meaning the territory of the sequani. If it were per fines eorum, it would be that the sequani were allowing them to go through some other tribe's territory. So backing up for a moment to Itakwe, and so he undertakes the task, he meaning Diwikiakis, and he obtains from the Sequani that they allow the Helvetii to go through their territory. A couple of more quick comments. You could view ut through patiantur as a noun clause that is the direct object of impetrat. He obtains blah, blah, blah. Like that's one sense unit, one noun clause. Also, you could view per through ire as a noun clause that is the direct object of patiantur. So we have a few layers here, layers of the onion to unpeel. Moving on. Obsidesque uti intersese dent perficit. Here we have another ut clause with a subjunctive verb working with verbs of determining, decreeing, resolving, etc. And here we have ut again, but with an alternate spelling. So uti is not the infinitive form of the verb utor. That's not what that is. It's merely an alternate spelling for ut. Why do they do that? Why do they have two different spellings for ut? I don't know. I used to try to figure it out and wonder if it has something to do with whether the next word starts with a consonant or vowel, but I could never fully get that to work. That was my theory. Honestly, I don't know why there are two forms. But anyway, uti here is just ut, and it's working with perficit. Perficit is the verb perficio, which is just per plus facio. And so it means to do thoroughly, to accomplish, to finish, to complete, to bring about. And actually, bring about is not a bad translation for this particular place. Perficit is present tense. So it means he accomplishes, he brings about, he completes. You could even say perhaps he works it out. And so after perficit, we go into ut plus the subjunctive verb. So he brings it about, that, and then next we need dent. Dent is a subjunctive form of do dare dati datum, which means give. It's present tense, third person plural, subjunctive. So perficit, and then uti and dent will say this. He brings it about that they give. Again, this looks to me like section 563D of Allen and Greenough, an ut clause with verbs of determining, decreeing, resolving, or bargaining. So perficit plus uti plus dent, he brings it about that they give, or he works it out in such a way that they give. And what do they give? Obsides. Obsides means hostages. That's accusative plural. And the que ending at the end of the word obsides supplies the word and, so it joins this clause to the previous clause. Intersese means among themselves. Sese is just an alternate spelling of se. It doesn't mean it's plural or anything like that. So starting with obsidesque, we have this. And he brings it about that they give hostages among themselves. Now, consider that we're translating perficit as kind of an impersonal. He brings it about. What's the it? Well, you could view obsidesque through dent as a noun clause that is the direct object of perficit. So he brings about that they give hostages. That's sort of one thing that could be the direct object of perficit. We're not really translating it that way, but I'm just mentioning that for grammatical knowledge. Finally, we have two more clauses with subjunctive verbs. The first one tells the Sequani end of the bargain, and the other tells the Helvetii end of the bargain. They each have stipulations that they have to follow for this deal to work. Sequani ne itinere Helvetios prohibeant. That says what the Sequani have to do, the terms of the agreement, so to speak, and then Helvetii ut sine maleficio et injuria transeant. We're still being governed by ut clauses with verbs of bargaining, decreeing, or resolving. And so We could even throw in our translation, they resolve it that, or they agree that, or they strike a bargain that. That might make it read a bit more smoothly. We don't really have to do that, but that's the idea. So within this first clause, sequani is the subject, and prohibeant is the verb prohibeo, which means to prevent or stop. That's subjunctive, third person plural, present tense. And it's being negated by ne. When it's a subjunctive verb, you use ne to negate it, not non. So they work it out, or they agree that the sequani not prevent. And then helvetios is the direct object. And then itinere is an ablative of separation. So we can say from their journey or from their route. Okay, so this clause says that the sequani not prevent the helvetii from their journey. We have an example here of ascendaton. We just go into a new clause without any kind of conjunction. There's no and, there's no et, there's no atque, there's no que ending at the end of the word helvetii. It's not helvetii que and the helvetii. You just have to throw the word and in for yourself if you want to. The semicolon here is helpful to show a division between these two clauses without actually adding in a word such as and. So the subject here is helvetii. Transeant is trans plus ao, to go across. It's subjunctive, third person plural. So helvetii plus transeant says the helvetii go across, or the helvetii cross. Sine maleficio means without mischief. Sine is a preposition that means without. It takes the ablative, so maleficio is ablative singular, and injuria is also the object of sine. That means injustice. So sine maleficio et injuria says without mischief and injustice. Notice the word order here. Each of these clauses starts with the name of the tribe, and then either ut or ne. So it seems that Caesar is organizing his word order in such a way to make the name of the tribe sort of like a little heading. It's kind of a neat word order. So here's how these last two clauses might read. And keep in mind, the idea is they work it out that, or they agree to the following terms, or they strike a bargain that, or the terms they came to are as follows. You have to have that in mind, that that's what is being talked about here. So literally, the sequani, that they not prevent the helvetii from their journey, the helvetii, that they cross without mischief and injustice. That brings us to the end of yet another episode of Lenny's Latin class. Thank you again for listening. Keep up the good work, and we'll see you again next time in Lesson 68.